Hello, hello, everyone. I'm here for Tuesday tea time on a Wednesday because I am just home from teaching in Europe for a couple of weeks, and I just needed another day to get my feet on the ground and feel balanced and centered and home again. So I'm here for tea time, and I've got Atlas and Ocasio and Ari and Z and Raz and Sassafras behind me. So all six. It's been beautiful coming home and finding that my herd is very settled. So all of the growing pains that went into going from 4 to 6 in my herd seem to have settled out beautifully. And I think that's my best coming home present. But I thought today for tea time, I would talk about something that has been coming up in a lot of my clinics and is really interesting. And this is the idea of persistent leadership. Sometimes when we're working with horses, we're going to persist and ask them to do things that they maybe don't want to do. Things that are hard for them. Now, how do we know that things are hard for the horse? Because horses will pull away from you when you try and do things that are hard, or they'll push into you when you try and do things that are hard for them. Sometimes they'll just ignore you if you try and do things that are hard for them, but that's a lower level of difficulty unless you're working in a way where they can't get away. If they can't push or they can't pull, or there's really bad consequences to pushing or pulling, they might choose to ignore you instead. Hey, Rebecca. I'm glad you're here. A lot of familiar names popping up. It's like a little party every week. I get to join you guys for tea time. So I wanted to talk today about persistent leadership. So I define leadership in a bunch of different ways, but it has a blanket idea. Leadership is someone who makes a decision that leads to harmony. If it doesn't lead to harmony, they're not a leader. So there's Ari behind me. Hi, Ari. As we work with our horses, a lot of times people define leadership as something where you are making horses do things they don't want to do. And in freedom, we can't do a lot of that, because if you do a lot of that, you don't have a horse anymore. They just leave. So I haven't done a lot of dominant leadership because dominant leadership requires tools. If you take away all the tools, your horse just won't let you dominate them much. Unless you have control of all the food resources. Then you can use the food resources to dominate them. But dominant leadership isn't really something we can use. So we have to learn about other types of leadership. So other types of leadership would be passive leadership. That's where you make really good decisions about how close or how far away you are from the horse, your positioning between you and the horse, and that creates harmony between you. We've got supportive leadership. Supportive leadership is where you go ahead and take actions that help them think better, helps them feel better. And it's not about making their body do anything. It's about changing the way they think or they feel so that they feel better. And then we've got assertive leadership, which everybody wants, which is where you can ask them to do things and it's just easy. You're asking things that are very, very easy for them, and you don't need a bridle, you don't need a halter. It's just something they like doing with you. Thank you, Cindy. It's good to be home. And then we've got persistent leadership. And persistent leadership is often one of the most uncomfortable types of leadership for my students, because the idea of freedom is that we're not making horses do things they don't want to do. Why would we persist? Now, persistent leadership and dominant leadership are a little bit different, just in their intensity. So persistent leadership is going to be where we ask and we ask again and we ask again until we get the answer we want. but you have to have a little bit of wisdom, because if you ask too many times, the horse just leaves. So there has to be a little bit of wisdom in your persistent leadership. And there's a couple different ways we can do it so that your horse chooses to stay with you and find the harmony together. Dominant leadership is different in that the horse wants to leave, but they can't. Okay? Or the horse wants to push you, but they can't. And this is where we have consequences. So the lead rope, obviously, on a halter stops the horse from leaving. So once we get into dominant leadership, we may need a lead rope to stop the horse when they want to leave. Persistent leadership is just short of that, where the horse might consider leaving, but they decide to stay with you anyway. Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we just do supportive leadership and passive leadership and assertive leadership? The reason that we would do persistent leadership is because greater contrast teaches faster, and also greater contrast is less irritating. So one of the things that happens with my students that really, really want to have a beautiful, peaceful relationship with their horses is they're so concerned with avoiding irritating their horse that they end up becoming slightly annoying all the time. If you can potentially irritate your horse a little bit or scare them a little bit and then repair it, this actually creates a horse that trusts you a little bit more than a horse you're always just irritating a little bit. Obviously, if you don't have any halter, you're not in a round pen, you don't have control of the food sources, you have to do it very carefully. You have to do it very awarely. But why we persist is because the outcome is sometimes better than if you avoid persisting. So let me give you an example. Let's say I go to stroke my horse's chest and it doesn't like it very much. So when I stroke the horse's chest, the first thing it does is it just ignores me. And maybe that has nothing to do with me and it's not ignoring me because it doesn't like it. It's just busy with something else. But the longer you stroke the chest and the longer they pointedly ignore it, the more you realize they're not really interested in responding to that. So now, if we stop stroking the chest after they've ignored you for 5 minutes, you have put them in a situation where they had to ignore you for 5 minutes. And then you've released the pressure and let them remember you like that. I did something you didn't like very much, and if you just ignore me long enough, I'll go away. This isn't great for the relationship. And this is what I see a lot of times with people that want to be really gentle, is they will do things that slightly irritate the horse. And then just before the horse actually takes an action to step away from that, they release the pressure. Now we've got sort of a bad association with stroking the chest. They're very tolerant, but they don't feel impressed with your understanding of who they are, what they like, or what they need. So what I am encouraging people to do is really pay attention. Is the action I'm taking making the situation better or worse? So if I stroke my horse's chest, do they flick an ear? Do they take a breath? Do they look at something different? Do they look at me? Do they do something to positively respond to that? If they don't, I should change it before I've done it for 5 minutes. So I'm not trying to stroke their chest so long that they have to shut down all their senses to ignore how much they hate it. If it doesn't get a good response, do something different. That would be your supportive leadership. You're willing to adapt. You're willing to change. If stroking their chest doesn't help them, stroke somewhere else. If stroking somewhere else doesn't help them, take a walk. Those are our really true supportive leadership actions, where we are willing to adapt our action until we find the action that actually helps the horse. Now, sometimes it is of value to persist. I know the horse doesn't like it when I stroke their chest, but I'm going to do it anyway. And while I'm stroking their chest, a cat might walk by. And when that cat walks by, they're going to look up, they're going to be curious about the cat, they're going to be interested in the cat, and I'm going to stop stroking the chest. What happened there is an accidental benefit of feeling, where they used their senses in a way that made the horse feel good, and you linked it to the fact that you were stroking their chest. So now next time you go to stroke their chest, there is a higher likelihood they will try and use their senses in a response to that feeling instead of shutting down all their senses and trying to ignore you. This is why we would persist, because we believe if we just keep doing it, it will get better. Now, what if it won't? Okay, what if you're going to stroke that chest until the horse pulls away from you? Okay, now we know we are in that place where this is difficult for them. Okay, this gives you a chance to circle around the horse, come back, and try and do it better, which means you're going to stroke the chest, and then you're going to move to a different action before you irritate them enough to walk off, but then you're going to come back to the chest, and you're going to alternate between the chest and something easier, the chest and something easier, until something accidentally makes the horse feel better. Then you're going to pause. You're going to match the horse. You're going to be just like the horse. And you're going to show them that what you wanted was always to help them feel better. Now, maybe stroking their chest wasn't the best way to get there, but that's what makes it persistent leadership. We're going to try and do something new or different or interesting to get to a good feeling. The more different ways we can get a horse to a good feeling, the better the relationship becomes. So that's why we would persist. I'm glad that was helpful, Magic. It's great to have you here. I'm just going to scroll back, see if I missed any other comments. I get into my theory here. Persisting can go a couple of different ways. So you have the type of persisting where you do the same thing over and over and over again. I use the example of stroking the chest. So if I stroke the horse's chest, I'm just going to do that over and over and over again. Either it's going to get better and the horse is going to look at something or smell something or breathe or use their sensory system in a good way where I can stop and I've linked stroking the chest to something better accidentally. Or I can advance and retreat where I can stroke the chest, do something easier, stroke the chest, do something easier, stroke the chest, do something easier. And I'm going to stop when I get a really good focus change, even if it's when I'm doing something easier. That's the less intense way of persisting. And I find you have to regulate it for the horse you're with. You're going to make mistakes. When you make a mistake, it's because you've persisted to the point where they need to pull away or push into you. And I encourage you to do that sometimes. Make a mistake, then fix it. It's actually much, much better to make a mistake and fix it than it is to irritate the horse and give up. Irritate the horse and give up. Irritate the horse and give up. This is really the feel and timing that I'm trying to help people understand. Horses don't mind if you make a mistake and they have to pull away from you to tell you you did too much. But they do mind if you make the same mistake over and over and over again. So if you've done something that causes the horse to pull away from you, well, that's great. Now you know that's where the line is. Okay, so you're going to circle around, you're going to come back, you're going to do it better, and you're going to try and change your action before you cause the horse to pull away from you. You're not going to stop and rest until the horse actually feels better. You're not done until the horse feels better. Because that harmony, a leader makes decisions that lead to harmony. You can have harmony where the horse is ignoring you, but that's not the best kind of harmony for your relationship. You need the kind of harmony where they are willingly using their sensory system to take in more information from the world around them, whether they're seeing or hearing or smelling or feeling or tasting. The sensory system is what gives a horse a feeling of quality of life. Now, I encourage people to use different kinds of leadership to help horses use their sensory system better. And when they use their sensory system better, they're going to associate that with you, and they're going to want to spend more time with you. You can do it with higher intensity. You can do it with lower intensity. If your intensity gets too high, they simply leave, if they can. So if you're not in control of the food and you don't have a halter on them, they will just walk away if your intensity gets too high. And that's one of the reasons I love freedom-based training, is the horse really gets to limit me in how much pressure I can put on them. This means that they become my teacher, and they tell me how much is reasonable for them. I was a horse trainer for a lot of years. I know how to put a horse in a round pen or put it on a halter and a lead rope and teach it to do pretty much whatever it is that you want them to do. But it's not as fun for me as this idea of letting the horse tell you what they're excited to learn. Letting the horse show you what kind of partnership works well for them. And that means that every action I take is designed to help us feel better together. We're not done with our actions until we feel better together. Now, when we feel better, we're going to pause. Now, that pause could be at the standstill, but it also could be riding at the walk. It also could be galloping down the beach. The pause just means we're no longer trying to change anything. So we can pause and just be in harmony. And that is what marks the moment. The goal of all of our actions, whether it was me asking the horse to change direction or go faster, go slower, or stroking them, all of the actions are supposed to lead to us feeling better together. Sylvia says, how would you work on duration then to be able to, example, keep the hands still on their back for longer? So this is a great question, Sylvia. If I want to be able to pause for longer, I have to do repetitions of shorter to build strength in that. So let's say I get a nice focus change. The horse flicks their ear, they're listening to something, and I just let my hand rest on their back. And we're in that pause state. It's going to have a time limit. And we're going to pause, let them remember how good that felt. And then before they're trying to pull away from that feeling or push into that feeling, then I'm going to go into action again. With repetitions, they are going to enjoy that pause more and more, so you can do it longer and longer. The way you teach them to like something is to give them not quite enough of it. So if I want to be able to rest my hand on their back for longer, I have to do many, many repetitions where it was good, but it wasn't quite as long as the horse wanted. This is the same for riding. It's the same for any of my pauses in harmony, whether we're galloping down the beach together, or we are walking through the forest together, or we're just standing still in the pasture. The pauses have to be a little bit shorter than the horse wants so that they want more next time. And eventually, your pauses can be very, very, very long. But you teach them to do that by making them short and many first. Rebecca says it helps a lot, as always, to hear it again and in a little different way. Thanks. Yeah. I love this work. I've been doing the same work with the horses for over 15 years now, and the work is the same. The way I explain it changes as I understand it better. And all of you help with that. When you ask me the right question, you help me explain it in a different way. All the horses, when I get a new horse and they have slightly different needs, I get to understand it again in a different way. And then I share it with you guys. So I would encourage all of you, if you can, if you have enough information about your horse to play with persisting, do that in 20% of your interactions. And you might persist by doing the same thing over and over until they feel better, or you might persist by alternating something that's hard for them with something that's easy for them until they feel better. Find a way to persist where you actually get to a better feeling, and then go back to easy things. easy things, so it's going to be your passive leadership, where the position you chose is easy enough that they want to do it for a while, and it results in harmony. The supportive leadership is fluid enough and changing enough that you can try one thing and try another thing and try another thing until you get to the good feeling. The assertive leadership, you know your horse well enough to know what you can ask them to do that's easy for them, and they're going to feel better afterwards. And then the persistent, we're going to do that about 20% of our interactions. I'm going to do something that's hard for them and see if we can feel good as a result anyway. This is what really stretches the comfort zone and makes life better for horses, because more things in life lead to a good feeling. The more narrow their view is, if only 5 things make them feel good, they're really always at a risk of feeling bad. If 500 things make them feel good, there's a lot less risk that they will feel bad. So we want to give them as many different circumstances as possible that result in a good feeling. About 20% of our interactions should maybe be things we have to persist on a little bit, where the horse is really trying hard to ignore you, or maybe even they pull away or they push into you to show you where the edges are. All right, and I see I have a couple more comments here. So Rebecca says, and when would be the best moment to end the session and walk away completely? We talked about this a bunch in the Portugal clinic, actually, and I think it's a really interesting question. When you end the session, it's not that it's a reward. It's not that your horse wants you to end the session. It's that the last thing that happened between you and your horse becomes very, very memorable, just because it's the last thing before you go away. And so you want to end on something that you want them to remember. Okay, so for me, I don't usually end on them sleeping, because I don't really want them to remember that as the most important thing we did. Except for today, I had a really lovely session with Ari, and he ended up lying down with my hand on his back in a way that was so beautiful. I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could repeat that in the future? That I want him to remember. I'm going to leave him there. He's standing underneath the neck of his friend that's watching out for him. He doesn't need me to watch out for him. I want to leave that as a thing he remembers that he and I might do in the future. So that was a very dramatic example. I don't usually leave horses when they're sleeping, because sleeping is not the most important thing we do together, unless it seems particularly special. So you could leave on the smallest little ear flick where they're listening to a bird and it makes them feel good. That's a thing you want them to remember. When I'm with my person, I felt good. But you could also wait, and you could leave when they check on something they don't usually check on. So it's a new variety of feel good. I think what I'm trying to say here is there's a million different times you can walk away and end the session. Make it a thing that you want them to remember, so that maybe they'll repeat it with you in the future. And this might go just for a simple pause too. So if I'm working and I find I really need to go get a drink of water, I'm just going to wait until something nice happens. And I'll go, great, think on that, remember that, I'm going to go get water, I'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll start again. And you can just bring that into every session. Whether you're pausing for 10 minutes or you're pausing until the next session the next day, or if you're like me, you're headed off to Europe and you won't be home for 6 weeks. Whatever it is that you're doing, end your session on something you'd like them to remember, because that's a really memorable moment. Magic says, how will the horse show us that he wants more? So there's a couple different ways the horse will show you they want more. Let me give you a concrete example. So if my hand is on the horse's back, and generally I take my hand off their back and go back to action before it's overwhelming. So with my hand on their back, they might take a big breath. They might show me all the different ways they feel good with my hand on their back. And I could respond and adjust a little bit, or I could just stay there. So let me simplify that. the way the horse shows you they want more is they use their sensory system in a really good way, bouncing back and forth between curiosity and comfort. They're a little bit aware, they use their senses, they rest. They're a little bit aware, they use their senses, they rest. And as long as they're back and forth between those two states of being, curiosity and comfort, they are really happy with where you're at. Okay? You are going to be careful with the tipping points. So the tipping points are where curiosity becomes exhausting for them. They've taken in too much information and they're starting to get tired. And that's when you know you need to take action soon, or they're going to tip over into concern. Or they're asleep. They've been sleeping for a long time. They are starting to become vulnerable, where they're likely to wake up and be irritated when they wake up. And you only know this by making the mistake a few times, but you can tell once you know your horse, they've been sleeping for too long. And if you don't take action and do something soon, they're going to wake up unhappy. Okay? So you're going to be careful of the tipping points. The horse tells you they want more of what you're doing by being really balanced between their curiosity and their comfort. And that is how you know you can keep doing the same thing, because they're regulating their nervous system really well between feeling, gathering information, resting, and then doing it again. So I hope that helps, Magic. I don't think I've ever explained it in quite that way, and I really like it. I'm going to have to write that down. So as I said, you guys are helpful to me. You ask the right questions. You help me explain it in new ways. And now I'm going to go ahead and end this tea time. I'm going to go back to my horses and let them keep teaching me as well. So thank you for your time. I should be back on Tuesdays next week. I'm home for a couple of weeks before I head off to Australia. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week.